All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We're looking at part two of the cell. We're moving away from the actual cell a little bit and just getting into some background information we need in order to move on. And it's all about how organisms are classified. So let's look at these two organisms. We have a lion and we have a tiger. And a question would come up in science is, are they related? And a more specific question would be, how closely are they related? Are they more closely than a lion and, say, a mountain lion? Well, that's what you need to decide. So I want you just to take a second just to pause it and just think about this for a second. What is more closely related? A lion and a mountain lion, or a lion and a tiger? Okay, so think about that for a second, and then we'll give you some background information. We'll tell you if you're right. So classification, the reason why we do this, all organisms have been classified into groups. We call them taxa. So you might have to pause these just to make sure you're getting all this info down. It's not a very long video, so just bear with me. And there are 7 levels of this classification system. We'll talk about what they are in a second. You go down these levels, organisms are more closely related. So if the organisms are at the top level, and what separates these organisms is based on physical characteristics. So it's not how they behave, it's not what they eat, it's static, not moving characteristics that don't change. So let's look at these classification systems. You've probably heard some of these before. So for example, kingdoms, things like these are the big classifications. So this is where all organisms are fit into these 5 characteristics, 4 or 5 groups. From there, it gets more specific. These animals can be broken down into phylums. Those phylums can be broken down into classes and orders and families and genus and species. This is obviously, by the word, means the most specific. There's only one type of one certain species. And what we do is that this is the order that they go in. Always, always, always. This is the most broad, and this is the more specific. Way for you guys to remember these, and it's a silly way to do it, but usually those are the best ways to remember it. I was told this by my grade 11 teacher when I was at Penn I, and I remember this because Kings play Canucks on Friday and Gretzky scores. So maybe not that appropriate with the whole hockey lockout right now, but nonetheless, just a way to remember it. And each one of the first letters pertains to the first level of these. So you have to be kind of familiar with these words in order to remember them, but just a nice easy acronym in order to remember it. So now let's look at this. So here are the kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Let's compare it to the tiger. So these are the same. So they're both part of the kingdom Animalia. They both are part of the phylum Chordata, which pretty much just means backbone. They're both mammals. They're both carnivores, both felines, both in the genus Panther. But their species name, this is Leo and this is Tigris. So that's the difference here. They're exactly the same except for the species. So if I was talking about these two organisms, I'd say these are very closely related. So let's look at the mountain lion. Animalia, yes, check, check, check. Carnivores, felines, but instead of panthers, this genus is Puma. If you were comparing these two are more closely related than these two. Okay? And it's all based on how far down you go. Let's look at how to actually distinguish between organisms. So we want to figure out whether or not they're closely related, if they're in a certain category. This is what they did. It's all based on physical characteristics. So if we're going to be these ones, we use something called a dichotomous tree, and di means 2. So there's 2 options. So if you're looking at classifying all of these organisms, you can use a key like this. You start off, does it have dry skin? If it has yes is the answer, you would go this way. If it's no, you go this way. So if it's no, it's automatically a salamander. And then you can keep going. And as you keep asking more questions that are one or the other, yes, no questions, it starts showing you what organisms they may be. But let's talk about the use of it. It's all made up of 2 parts. You may need to pause these just to write it down. Each step, 2 options are presented, just like you saw here. That's right. It's either a yes, no answer. User chooses a path based on physical characteristics, things that you can see, in order to determine what route you're going to take. Eventually, the user to one object. If you guys remember the Choose Your Own Adventure books, my picture of a book, and you can decide which way you're going to go. You know, if you want to go down the stairs, go to page 34, and if you want to keep going upstairs, go to page 43. And then same thing, you keep having more options until at the very end you're left with one final decision on what happened in your story. You get to the ending. Okay, it's the same thing with this. Instead of what pages you're going to be choosing specific organisms based on their characteristics. So how do you make a dichotomous? What you take is all the organisms that you're given and you separate them based on what they look like. So choices are based on what an object looks like, not those things can change. The characteristics that we need have to be constant, which means they stay the same. Finally, what are the steps for making it? So step one, you're going to take all of your organisms that you have and you break them down into two groups based on one single characteristic. So it might be, if you're talking about people, it might be breaking it down into boys and girls. You're going to separate each of those two groups based on a single characteristics. You might be above 5 feet and below, or let's say 6 feet. And girls might be above 5'5" and below. And then you keep doing that until you have all your people separated out. So repeat step 2 until all objects are in their own group. Just to finish here, make sure that we know what all of the different categories are. So Kings play Canucks on Friday, Gretzky scores, making sure that we know that's the classification system. We're going to be doing a lot of work with different dichotomous keys next day and how to use them. But really this is just a precursor lesson for all the stuff that's going to come next, because we're going to be diving into microbiology and then also into animal biology, and we need to know how each of the organisms are classified and named. And organisms